The smell of industrial-strength disinfectant mixed with chicken nuggets hit Richard Bennett the moment he stepped into Lincoln Elementary's cafeteria. His $1,000 Italian shoes squeaked against the freshly mopped linoleum floor as he followed the eager school administrator through rows of small tables filled with chattering children. "Mr. Bennett, we're so honored to have you visit our school," gushed Mrs. Patterson, the assistant principal, practically bouncing in her sensible flats. "The children are absolutely thrilled about your technology grant." Richard nodded politely, his mind already calculating how quickly he could complete this photo opportunity and return to his office. The board had insisted on these community visits to improve his company's public image, but standing among sticky tables and juice boxes felt like stepping into another universe. His phone buzzed with urgent emails about the quarterly earnings report, stock prices, and merger negotiations. Numbers that actually mattered. Real business that required his attention. Not this circus of childhood chaos that served no purpose beyond a tax write-off and some positive press coverage. "Perhaps we could take a few photos of you with some of our students," Mrs. Patterson suggested, gesturing toward a table of excited second graders waving enthusiastically. "They've prepared some thank you cards for your generosity." As Richard forced a smile and approached the children's table, his attention caught on a small girl sitting alone at the far end of the cafeteria. While every other child around her laughed and ate their lunches, she sat perfectly still, staring down at a faded pink lunchbox covered in cartoon unicorns that had seen better days. Something about her posture struck him as odd. She wasn't eating. She wasn't talking to anyone. She just sat there, her small hands resting on either side of the closed lunchbox, as if gathering courage for something difficult. The photographer positioned Richard behind the group of children, and he mechanically went through the motions of smiling and nodding while they showed him their colorful drawings. But his eyes kept drifting back to the lone girl at the distant table. She couldn't be more than 8 years old, with neat braids adorned with small pink ribbons that matched her worn but clean dress. Her posture was too mature for her age, carrying a weight that children shouldn't know. While other kids bounced in their seats and traded snacks, she remained motionless. "Mr. Bennett, could you hold up this banner?" the photographer called out, but Richard barely heard him. The little girl had finally opened her lunchbox. Richard watched, expecting to see the usual array of sandwiches, fruit, and cookies that filled every other child's lunch. Instead, the lunchbox contained only a single folded piece of paper. She unfolded it carefully as if handling something precious and fragile. As she read whatever was written there, her small shoulders sagged just slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough for someone watching closely to notice the moment hope left her body. She folded the paper back up with the same careful precision, placed it gently back in the lunchbox and closed the lid. Then she sat there, hands folded in her lap, watching other children eat their lunches while she had nothing. "Mr. Bennett?" Mrs. Patterson's voice seemed to come from far away. "The children are ready for the group photo now." But Richard couldn't move. He couldn't smile for cameras or hold banners or pretend this visit was about anything other than good publicity. Because sitting 30 feet away from him was a child who had opened her lunchbox expecting food and found only a note. What kind of note does a mother put in an empty lunchbox? The question hit him like a physical blow. In all his years of building companies, making deals, and accumulating wealth that most people couldn't even comprehend, he had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with money, influence, or strategic thinking. But looking at this little girl, he realized he was witnessing something that challenged every assumption he'd made about the world. His assistant, Jennifer, appeared at his elbow with her tablet and apologetic smile. "Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have the Goldman Sachs conference call in 20 minutes. We should probably wrap up here soon." Richard held up one hand to silence her, his eyes still fixed on the child. The photographer was growing impatient, the children were getting restless, and Mrs. Patterson was clearly concerned about staying on schedule. But none of that mattered anymore. Because right now, in this moment, Richard Bennett was watching a little girl sit alone with an empty lunchbox, and something fundamental inside him was breaking apart. Have you ever witnessed a moment that completely changed your perspective on life? This story is about to take you on an incredible journey of transformation, love, and the power of human kindness. If stories like this touch your heart and remind you of what really matters, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Richard ignored the concerned murmurs around him and walked directly toward the little girl's table. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if his expensive shoes were weighted with lead. The cafeteria noise seemed to fade into the background until all he could hear was his own heartbeat and the quiet sounds of children eating their lunches. The girl looked up as his shadow fell across her table. Her eyes were large and brown, filled with a mixture of curiosity and wariness that no 8-year-old should possess. She straightened slightly in her chair, instinctively preparing to defend herself or explain her presence. "Hello," Richard said softly, lowering himself into the small plastic chair across from her. It creaked ominously under his weight. "I'm Richard. What's your name?" "Stella," she replied in a voice barely above a whisper. Her hands moved protectively toward her lunchbox as if shielding it from view. "That's a beautiful name. Like the stars." Richard found himself speaking more gently than he had in years, maybe decades. "Would you mind if I asked about your lunchbox? I couldn't help but notice you haven't eaten anything." Stella's eyes darted around the cafeteria, checking to see if anyone else was listening. When she was satisfied they were relatively alone, she looked back at Richard with an expression far too serious for her age. "I don't have lunch today," she said simply. "My mama wrote me a note to explain." Before Richard could respond, a clear, firm voice interrupted from behind him. "Excuse me, sir. I don't believe we've been properly introduced." Richard turned to find a woman in her early 30s standing beside their table. She wore a bright blue dress that complemented her warm brown skin, and her natural hair was styled in an elegant crown that framed her face beautifully. Her posture radiated both authority and genuine care. "I'm Camille Washington, the principal here at Lincoln Elementary," she continued, extending her hand. "And you appear to be having a conversation with one of my students without any staff supervision." Richard stood quickly, nearly knocking over the tiny chair in his haste. "Richard Bennett. I apologize if I overstepped. I just noticed that Stella here doesn't have lunch today, and I was concerned." Camille's expression softened slightly at his explanation, but her protective stance remained. She had clearly dealt with well-meaning but potentially problematic adults before. "Stella, sweetheart, why don't you tell Mr. Bennett what your note says?" Camille suggested gently, placing a caring hand on the child's shoulder. Stella looked up at her principal with complete trust, then back at Richard. "My mama works really hard, but sometimes there isn't enough money for lunch. She writes me notes so I know she's trying and that she loves me anyway." She opened her lunchbox again and carefully unfolded the piece of paper. In neat handwriting, obviously written with great care, the note read, "My sweet Stella, I'm so sorry there's no food today. I promise I'll try again tomorrow. You are my sunshine and I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Love, Mama." The words hit Richard like a punch to the chest. Here was a mother who couldn't afford to feed her child, yet she took the time to write a loving note explaining the situation with dignity and tenderness. No excuses, no blame. Just love and an honest acknowledgement of their circumstances. "Where is Stella's mother now?" Richard asked, his voice thick with emotion he hadn't expected to feel. "Monica works 3 jobs, Camille explained. She cleans offices early in the morning, works at a grocery store during the day, and stocks shelves at a warehouse at night. She's doing everything she can, but sometimes it's just not quite enough to cover everything." Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. "Please let me buy Stella lunch right now. And every day for the rest of the school year." Both Camille and Stella stared at him in surprise. Camille's first instinct was clearly to refuse the offer from this stranger in an expensive suit, but something in Richard's expression stopped her. "Why would you want to do that?" Camille asked carefully. "You don't even know us." "Because no child should sit in a cafeteria with an empty lunchbox," Richard replied without hesitation. "Because that note from her mother shows more love and dignity than I've encountered in most boardrooms. And because I have the resources to help, so I should help." Stella looked between the two adults, her eyes wide with hope she was trying not to show. "Would that really be okay?" "More than okay," Richard said firmly. "It would be an honor." Camille studied Richard's face intently, looking for any hint of ulterior motives or conditions attached to his offer. What she saw was genuine emotion and a man who seemed as surprised by his own reaction as she was. "Stella," Camille said softly, "would you like Mr. Bennett to help make sure you have lunch every day?" "Yes, please," Stella whispered, then added more loudly, "Thank you, Mr. Bennett. That's really, really kind of you." The simple gratitude in her voice nearly undid Richard completely. When was the last time someone had thanked him with such genuine appreciation? When was the last time he had done something that mattered to another human being? "Would you like me to call your mother and explain what's happening?" Camille offered. "I think she should know about Mr. Bennett's generous offer. Could you tell her that I said yes please and thank you?" Stella asked earnestly. "And that the nice man has kind eyes?" Camille smiled, the first genuine smile she had given Richard since their introduction. "I'll tell her exactly that." As they walked toward the cafeteria lunch line to get Stella something to eat, Richard felt something shifting inside his chest. For the first time in years, maybe decades, he was doing something that had nothing to do with profit margins, stock prices, or strategic advantages. He was simply helping a little girl eat lunch. And somehow, that felt more important than anything else he had accomplished in his entire career. 2 weeks later, Richard found himself walking through Lincoln Elementary's hallways with a familiarity that would have shocked his former self. He had initially planned to simply set up a payment system for Stella's lunches and move on with his life. Instead, he discovered that good intentions had a way of expanding beyond their original boundaries. "Mr. Bennett, you're here early today," Camille observed as she met him near the main office. She wore a bright green dress that brought out the warmth in her smile, and Richard noticed how her presence seemed to instantly make the entire school feel more welcoming. "I wanted to check on the lunch program status," Richard replied, falling into step beside her as they walked toward her office. "Jennifer ran the numbers yesterday, and we're currently covering 47 children." The number still amazed him. What had started as a simple gesture for one little girl had revealed a much larger problem. Once Camille realized Richard's offer was genuine and ongoing, she had quietly identified other children who struggled with food insecurity. Richard's response had been immediate: cover them all. 47 children who now eat lunch every day because you decided to pay attention, Camille said as she unlocked her office door. "Do you understand what that means to these families?" Richard settled into the chair across from her desk, a chair he had occupied frequently over the past 2 weeks. "I'm beginning to understand. Mrs. Rodriguez called my office yesterday to thank me personally. She cried on the phone for 10 minutes. Elena Rodriguez works 2 jobs and takes care of her elderly father," Camille explained, pouring 2 cups of coffee from the small machine in her office. "Her son Tommy was skipping lunch and telling everyone he wasn't hungry so other kids wouldn't know they couldn't afford it. An 8-year-old boy was going hungry to preserve his dignity," Richard said quietly, accepting the coffee cup. "How did I not know this was happening?" Camille sat back in her chair and studied Richard's face. Over the past 2 weeks, she had watched this billionaire businessman transform from a skeptical stranger into someone genuinely invested in her school community. The change seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "Most people don't know because families like ours are good at hiding our struggles," she said honestly. "We work hard to maintain dignity and normalcy for our children. We don't advertise when we're barely making ends meet." "Tell me about the other programs the school needs," Richard said, pulling out his phone to take notes. "Not just food. Everything." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Richard, you've already done more than anyone could expect. You don't need to solve every problem at Lincoln Elementary." "Maybe not," Richard agreed, "but I want to understand what challenges you're facing. Consider it research." She laughed, a sound that Richard was beginning to treasure. "Research for what?" "For figuring out how to make a real difference instead of just writing checks for tax deductions." Camille's expression grew more serious. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do. These past 2 weeks have taught me more about actual problem solving than the last 5 years of board meetings. So tell me, what else do these kids need?" Camille opened a file folder on her desk and spread out several documents. "After-school care is our biggest challenge. Most of our parents work multiple jobs or late hours. Kids end up home alone from 3:30 until 7 or 8 at night. How many children need after-school care? About 60, but we can only accommodate 25 with our current staffing and space limitations." Richard made notes on his phone. "What about tutoring? Academic support? Desperately needed. Many of our children are bright and capable, but they don't have quiet spaces to do homework or adults available to help them. They fall behind not because they can't learn, but because they don't have support systems at home." "And the teachers? What do they need to be more effective?" Camille looked surprised by the question. "You want to know about teacher needs too? I want to know about everything. If I'm going to get involved, I want to understand the whole picture." She pulled out another folder. "Classroom supplies are always an issue. We spend our own money on basic materials like pencils, paper, and books. The art and music programs have been cut completely due to budget constraints. What would it cost to restore the art and music programs?" "Richard." Camille started, but he held up his hand. "I'm not making any commitments yet. I'm just trying to understand the scope of what's needed." She calculated quickly. "Probably 50,000 for the year. That would cover a part-time art teacher, a part-time music teacher, and basic supplies for both programs." Richard nodded, making more notes. "What about technology? Computer access? We have a computer lab, but half the machines don't work and the software is years out of date. Most of our children don't have computers at home, so they're already behind in digital literacy. As Camille continued explaining the school's needs, Richard found himself not thinking about costs or budgets, but about faces. Stella's face when she opened her empty lunchbox. Tommy Rodriguez's face when he pretended he wasn't hungry. The faces of 60 children who went home to empty houses every afternoon. "I have a proposition," Richard said when Camille finished her overview. "I'm listening." "What if we created a comprehensive support program? Not just lunch but after-school care, tutoring, art and music classes, computer labs, whatever these kids need to succeed." Camille stared at him. "Richard, do you understand what you're suggesting? That would be hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. It would also be the most important investment I've ever made." The sincerity in his voice made Camille's chest tighten with emotion. "What? Why are you willing to do this?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. 2 weeks ago, I was a man who measured success in stock prices and profit margins. Then I met a little girl with an empty lunchbox and a mother who writes love notes instead of making excuses. Something about that combination of dignity, love, and need changed something fundamental in how I see the world. He paused, looking directly into Camille's eyes. "And I've been working with an incredible principal who shows me every day what real leadership looks like. Someone who knows every child's name, every family's story, and somehow finds ways to give them hope even when resources are limited." Camille felt her cheeks warm at his words. "Richard, I want to be part of something that actually matters, Camille. Will you help me figure out how to do that?" Looking at his earnest expression, at this powerful man who was asking for her guidance instead of trying to impose his own ideas, Camille realized she was seeing something rare, someone genuinely committed to making a difference. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll help you." The smile that spread across Richard's face was worth more than any profit margin he had ever achieved. 3 months into their partnership, Richard barely recognized his own life. Instead of starting his mornings with stock reports and conference calls, he found himself in Lincoln Elementary's cafeteria at 7:30, helping serve breakfast to children who arrived early for the new morning program they had established. "Mr. Richard, look what I drew," called out Destiny, a second grader who had initially been too shy to speak to him. She held up a colorful picture of what appeared to be a very tall man in a suit standing next to a very short girl with braids. "That's us," she explained proudly. "You and me and my new crayons from the art class." Richard knelt down to examine the drawing more carefully. "This is absolutely beautiful, Destiny. May I take a picture of it to show my assistant Jennifer?" The little girl beamed and nodded enthusiastically. Richard carefully photographed the artwork, making sure to capture every detail of Destiny's proud expression along with her creation. "Mr. Bennett, you have a visitor," called Camille from the cafeteria entrance. Richard looked up to see a woman in a professional navy blue suit standing beside her, looking around the breakfast program with obvious interest. "That's Janet Morrison from the City Education Board," Camille explained as Richard approached. "She heard about our programs and wanted to see them in action." Richard extended his hand to Ms. Morrison. "Richard Bennett. I'm pleased to meet you." "Mr. Bennett, what you've accomplished here in just 3 months is remarkable," Ms. Morrison said, shaking his hand firmly. "The breakfast program, after-school care, tutoring services, and arts education restoration. Lincoln Elementary has become a model for comprehensive student support." "The credit belongs entirely to Principal Washington and her staff," Richard replied, glancing at Camille. "I just provided funding. They provided the expertise and dedication that made everything work." Camille felt a warm flutter in her chest at his words. Over the past months, Richard had consistently deflected praise and highlighted her leadership at every opportunity. It was a level of respect and recognition she had rarely experienced from powerful men. "I'd love to tour the facilities and see how we might replicate this model at other schools in the district," Ms. Morrison continued. "I'll be happy to show you around," Camille offered. "Richard, would you like to join us?" As they walked through the school, Richard watched Camille explain each program component with passionate expertise. She knew every detail, every success story, every challenge they had overcome. Her dedication was evident in every interaction with staff and students. In the computer lab, they found 12 children working on digital literacy projects under the guidance of Mrs. Chin, the new technology coordinator Richard had helped hire. "These computers are amazing," exclaimed Marcus, a 4th grader who had never touched a computer before the program began. "I'm making a presentation about my family's history. Marcus has discovered he has a real talent for research and presentation," Mrs. Chin explained. Several of our students have shown remarkable aptitude once they gained access to proper technology. In the art room, they watched children create colorful paintings while discussing their feelings and experiences with Ms. Rodriguez, the part-time art therapist they had added to the program. Art gives them a way to express things they might not be able to put into words, Ms. Rodriguez explained quietly. We've seen significant improvements in emotional regulation and self-confidence. The after-school tutoring program was bustling with activity. High school volunteers worked one-on-one with elementary students on homework and reading skills, while adult volunteers helped with more challenging subjects. Test scores have improved by an average of 15% since the program began, Camille told Ms. Morrison. But more importantly, we're seeing improvements in school attendance, classroom behavior, and general enthusiasm for learning. During their tour of the music room, they found Stella at the piano, carefully picking out a simple melody with intense concentration. Richard's chest tightened with emotion watching the same little girl who had sat with an empty lunchbox now pursuing something that brought her obvious joy. Stella has natural musical ability, explained Mr. Jackson, the part-time music teacher. She's been coming in during lunch breaks to practice. I think with proper lessons she could really develop her talent. After Ms. Morrison left with promises to discuss district-wide expansion, Richard found himself alone with Camille in her office. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow that highlighted the contentment in her expression. You did something amazing today, Richard said, settling into his usual chair. Watching you explain the programs, seeing how much you care about every detail, it was inspiring. Camille smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. We did something amazing. This partnership has been incredible, Richard. I've never had the resources to truly address all of our students' needs before. It's more than just resources, Richard said quietly. Working with you has taught me what passion and purpose actually look like. You've changed how I see everything. Their eyes met across the desk and Camille felt her heart skip slightly. Over the past months, she had watched Richard transform from a distant businessman into someone genuinely committed to their community. But more than that, she had begun to genuinely enjoy his company, their conversations, their shared meals in the teacher's lounge. Richard, she started, then hesitated. What is it? I want you to know how much this means. Not just the funding but your time, your attention, your genuine care for these children. They talk about you constantly. You've become part of their world. Richard leaned forward slightly. They've become part of my world too. All of them. Including their remarkable principal. The air between them seemed to shimmer with unspoken possibilities. Camille felt herself drawn to Richard's sincerity, his newfound passion for making a difference, the way he looked at her with respect and something deeper she was afraid to name. Would you like to have dinner tonight? Richard asked suddenly. Not to discuss school business. Just dinner. Together. Camille's smile lit up her entire face. I would like that very much. As they sat together in her office, surrounded by evidence of the good they had accomplished together, both of them realized they were on the verge of something wonderful and life-changing. Something that went far beyond empty lunchboxes and full programs. Something that looked remarkably like love. 2 weeks after their first official dinner date, Richard found himself attending his third community barbecue in the Lincoln Elementary playground. The evening was warm and filled with the sounds of children playing, parents laughing, and the sizzle of hamburgers on borrowed grills. He wore a simple red polo shirt and khaki pants instead of his usual business attire, and somehow felt more comfortable than he had in years. Mr. Richard, come push me on the swings, called out Stella, who had become his unofficial tour guide at community events. Her confidence had blossomed over the past months, transforming her from the quiet girl with the empty lunchbox into a vibrant child who approached each day with enthusiasm. In just a minute, sweetheart, Richard called back, finishing his conversation with Mrs. Patterson about the upcoming school fundraiser for new playground equipment. Look at you becoming quite the local celebrity, Camille teased as she approached with 2 plates of food. She wore a bright maroon sundress that complemented her glowing skin, and Richard felt his heart skip as she smiled at him. Celebrity might be overstating it, Richard replied, accepting a plate of perfectly grilled corn and chicken. But I have to admit, this feels more like home than my penthouse apartment ever did. They found a quiet spot at one of the picnic tables where they could watch the children play while enjoying their meal. Richard noticed how naturally Camille interacted with every family present, remembering details about grandparents' health, celebrating job promotions, and offering gentle support for various challenges. Mrs. Washington, I wanted to thank you again, said Monica Thompson, approaching their table with Stella in tow. The job you helped me get through your employment program has made such a difference for our family. Richard looked at Camille with surprise. Employment program? It's something we started last month, Camille explained, looking slightly embarrassed by the attention. We partner with local businesses to help parents find better-paying jobs with more stable hours. Mama got promoted to supervisor, Stella announced proudly. And she doesn't have to work at night anymore, so she can help me with homework. Monica's eyes filled with tears of gratitude as she looked between Richard and Camille. 6 months ago, I was working 3 jobs and still couldn't afford to feed my daughter lunch. Now she's taking piano lessons, I have a career with benefits, and we're saving money for the first time in years. After Monica and Stella walked away, Richard turned to Camille with admiration. An employment program? How many other initiatives are you running that I don't know about? A few, Camille admitted. The lunch and after-school programs freed up resources that allowed us to address other family needs. We have a financial literacy workshop, a community garden, and we're starting a small business development program next month. All of this grew out of one little girl's empty lunchbox, Richard mused, watching Stella play tag with a group of friends. All of this grew out of one person deciding to pay attention instead of looking away, Camille corrected gently. They were interrupted by the arrival of David Kim, a local reporter who had been documenting the changes at Lincoln Elementary over the past months. Mr. Bennett, Ms. Washington, I hope I'm not interrupting, David said politely. I wanted to let you know that our story about the Lincoln Elementary programs will be running in Sunday's paper. The response from other schools has been incredible. What kind of response? Camille asked. 15 schools and 3 districts want to implement similar programs. The mayor's office has called twice asking for meetings. There's talk about making this a citywide model for comprehensive student support. Richard felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Media attention meant scrutiny, questions about his motives, and potential complications for the simple, direct work they were doing. I hope the focus stays on the programs and the children they serve, Richard said carefully. This isn't about publicity or recognition. Actually, that's exactly why the story is resonating, David explained. People are inspired by the authenticity of what you've accomplished. No fanfare, no press releases, just real solutions making a real difference. After David left, Camille noticed Richard's thoughtful expression. You're worried about the attention, aren't you? I'm worried about it changing things, Richard admitted. Right now this feels pure. Real. I don't want it to become about politics or publicity or anything other than helping kids succeed. Camille reached across the table and touched his hand gently. Richard, look around you. Look at Stella playing with her friends. Look at Monica talking with other parents about career opportunities. Look at children who are thriving because you decided their well-being mattered more than your comfort zone. She paused, studying his face with the same attention she gave to understanding her students' needs. You can't keep this kind of positive change contained. It's going to grow and spread because that's what good things do when they're rooted in genuine love and care. And if it gets complicated? If there are politics and bureaucracy and people with agendas? Then we'll handle it together, Camille said simply. Just like we've handled everything else. The word, together, settled into Richard's chest like a promise. Over the past months, working alongside Camille had become the most natural thing in his life. Her wisdom, compassion, and practical problem-solving skills complemented his resources and business experience in ways that created something neither could accomplish alone. Together, he repeated, turning his hand palm up to properly hold hers. As the sun began to set over the playground, casting a golden glow over children playing and families sharing meals, Richard realized he was witnessing something he had never experienced before. Genuine community. People caring for each other not because they had to, but because they chose to. And at the center of it all was the woman whose hand he was holding, whose vision and dedication had transformed his understanding of what success actually meant. What would you do if you discovered that your entire definition of success was wrong? This incredible journey of transformation continues to unfold in ways that will surprise and inspire you. If you believe in the power of community and authentic connections, please subscribe and let us know in the comments what community means to you. As Stella ran up to their table, breathless from playing and beaming with happiness, Richard knew he was exactly where he belonged. The annual Lincoln Elementary Spring Festival filled the school gymnasium with music, laughter, and the proud energy of families celebrating together. Colorful banners created by the art program hung from the ceiling, while the restored music program provided live entertainment on a small stage decorated with flowers from the community garden. Richard stood near the refreshment table, watching Camille move gracefully through the crowd in a stunning bright blue dress that made her look like she was glowing. Over the past 6 months, he had fallen completely and irrevocably in love with this remarkable woman, and tonight he planned to tell her. "Mr. Richard, are you going to ask Miss Washington to dance?" asked Stella, appearing beside him with a knowing smile that seemed far too sophisticated for a 9-year-old. "How did you know I was thinking about dancing?" Richard asked, genuinely surprised by her perceptiveness. "Because you get the same look on your face when you watch her that my mama gets when she looks at pictures of my daddy," Stella explained matter-of-factly. "Like she makes you happy just by being there." The simple honesty of childhood observations never ceased to amaze Richard. "You're very wise, Miss Stella." "I know," she replied with the confidence of a child who had grown secure in her place in the world. "So are you going to ask her to dance or just stand here looking happy?" Before Richard could respond, the music changed to a slower song, and couples began moving onto the makeshift dance floor in the center of the gymnasium. Richard took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and walked toward Camille with determination. "Principal Washington," he said formally, offering his hand with a slight bow that made her laugh. "Would you honor me with a dance?" "I would be delighted, Mr. Bennett," she replied, accepting his hand with the same playful formality. As they moved onto the dance floor, Richard felt the familiar electricity that always accompanied Camille's touch. She fit perfectly in his arms, and they moved together with an ease that suggested they had been dancing together for years rather than minutes. "You look beautiful tonight," Richard said softly, close enough to her ear that only she could hear. "Thank you," Camille replied, feeling the warmth of his breath against her skin. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They swayed together in comfortable silence for several moments, surrounded by the happy chaos of their community celebration but existing in their own private bubble of contentment. "Camille," Richard said suddenly, his voice more serious, "I need to tell you something important." She looked up at his face, noting the intensity in his expression. "What is it?" "I love you." The simple declaration hit Camille like a physical force. She stopped dancing and stared up at Richard, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Richard, I know this might seem sudden, but it's not. I've been falling in love with you since the day you challenged me in your office, since the first time I watched you put a child's needs before your own comfort, since every conversation we've shared about dreams and possibilities and making the world better." His hands tightened slightly on her waist, as if anchoring himself for whatever response might come. "I love your intelligence, your compassion, your fierce dedication to these children. I love how you make me want to be a better man. I love how you've shown me what it means to live for something bigger than myself." Camille felt tears gathering in her eyes. "Richard, You don't have to say anything right now," he continued quickly. "I just needed you to know. Working with you, building these programs together, becoming part of this community, it's been the most meaningful time of my life. And it's meaningful because I get to share it with you." Around them, other couples continued dancing, children ran between the tables, and families enjoyed the evening's festivities. But for Camille, the entire world had narrowed down to Richard's earnest face and the overwhelming realization that her feelings for him ran much deeper than professional partnership or friendship. "Do you want to know what I love about you?" she asked softly, reaching up to touch his cheek. Relief flooded Richard's expression at the word, love. "I love that you saw Stella's empty lunchbox and couldn't look away. I love that you didn't just write a check and disappear, but stayed to understand and learn and become part of our lives. I love that you treat every child in this school like they matter, like their dreams and struggles and potential are important." She paused, struggling to find words for feelings that seemed too big for language. "I love that you've never once tried to take over or impose your ideas, but always asked what we needed and how you could help. I love that you've grown into someone who measures success by children's smiles instead of profit margins." Her voice broke slightly with emotion. "And I love that when you look at me, I see myself through your eyes and I like who I am there." "Camille," Richard whispered, overwhelmed by the honesty and beauty of her words. "I love you too, Richard. I love you so much it scares me sometimes." The kiss that followed was gentle, tender, and witnessed by approximately 200 members of their community. The applause and cheers that erupted around them made both Richard and Camille laugh through their tears. "Well," Camille said, wiping her eyes and trying to restore some semblance of professional composure, "I suppose that answers any questions about our relationship status. Are you okay with everyone knowing?" Richard asked, suddenly concerned about her privacy and professional reputation. "Richard," she said, taking his hands in both of hers, "look around you. This community exists because you decided to care about a little girl's empty lunchbox. These families are thriving because we chose to work together instead of accepting that problems were too big to solve." She gestured toward the celebration surrounding them, children playing games funded by his foundation, parents sharing meals made possible by the community garden, teenagers volunteering as tutors through the mentorship program they had developed together. This is what love looks like when it's lived out loud. This is what happens when people choose connection over comfort, community over convenience, generosity over greed. Richard looked around the gymnasium with new eyes, seeing not just a school event but a living testament to what was possible when people committed to caring for each other. "So yes," Camille continued, "I'm more than okay with everyone knowing that I love the man who helped make all of this possible." As the music began again and they returned to dancing, Richard felt a profound sense of completion. He had spent decades building financial empire, accumulating wealth and power and status. But none of that compared to this moment, dancing with the woman he loved, surrounded by a community they had helped build together, knowing that his life finally had meaning that would outlast any stock price or quarterly report. Looking over Camille's shoulder, he caught sight of Stella watching them with obvious approval. She gave him an enthusiastic thumbs up and mouthed the words, "I told you so." Richard threw back his head and laughed with pure joy, spinning Camille around the dance floor while their community celebrated around them. The morning Richard walked into Lincoln Elementary to find protesters gathered outside the school was the morning he learned that success always comes with complications. Signs reading "Stop Rich Man's Takeover" and "Our schools aren't your tax write-offs" were held by a small but vocal group organized by the teachers' union representative, Mr. Harrison, who had been vocal in his opposition to what he called privatization of public education. "Richard, I'm so sorry about this," Camille said as she met him at the staff entrance. Her usual bright morning energy was subdued by stress and concern. Harrison called the local news stations. "They're setting up cameras now." "What exactly is he claiming?" Richard asked, taking her hand as they walked through the hallways filled with children who seemed oblivious to the controversy brewing outside. "That your programs undermine public funding for education. That you're creating a two-tier system where schools with wealthy benefactors succeed while others are left behind. That private involvement in public schools sets a dangerous precedent." Richard felt the familiar tightness in his chest that accompanied any situation where his motives were questioned or misrepresented. "Are those valid concerns?" "Some of them raise important policy questions," Camille admitted. "But Harrison has been against our programs from the beginning. He's more interested in making political points than finding solutions." In her office, they found copies of a press release Harrison had distributed to media outlets. Richard read through the accusations with growing frustration. Wealthy businessman uses struggling school for publicity purposes. Community programs create dependency rather than sustainable solutions. Private funding threatens democratic oversight of public education. "The timing is interesting," Camille noted. "This comes just 2 weeks after the school district announced they want to expand our model to 12 other schools." "You think he's trying to stop the expansion?" "I think he's trying to protect his union's negotiating position. If schools can get private funding for programs, it reduces pressure on the district to increase education budgets through traditional channels." A knock on the office door interrupted their conversation. Jennifer, Richard's assistant, entered looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Mr. Bennett, I have 3 news outlets requesting interviews, the district superintendent wants an emergency meeting, and your board of directors is asking for a full briefing on your involvement here." The complications Richard had feared were materializing exactly as he had anticipated. What had started as a simple desire to help one little girl eat lunch was becoming a political controversy that threatened to overshadow the actual work they were doing. "What do you want to do?" Camille asked, studying Richard's face for signs of retreat or regret. "I want to protect the programs and the children they serve," Richard replied without hesitation. "Everything else is secondary. Even if it means negative publicity for your company? Especially if it means negative publicity for my company. My stock price isn't worth compromising one child's education or nutrition." The strength and certainty in his voice reminded Camille why she had fallen in love with this man. In moments of pressure, Richard's true priorities became crystal clear. "Then we fight," she said simply. "Together." The press conference Harrison organized took place on the school steps at noon, during lunchtime when the children would be inside and away from cameras. Richard and Camille stood together, presenting a united front while Harrison made his accusations to a small crowd of reporters and union supporters. "Mr. Bennett's involvement in Lincoln Elementary creates an unfair advantage that other schools cannot access," Harrison declared. "Public education should be funded publicly, not dependent on the charity of wealthy individuals with their own agendas. When Richard stepped forward to respond, his voice was calm but firm. Mr. Harrison is absolutely right about one thing. Every child deserves access to quality education, nutritious meals, and comprehensive support programs. Where we disagree is whether we should wait for perfect policy solutions while children go hungry. He gestured toward the school building behind them. Right now, 47 children eat lunch every day who couldn't afford it 6 months ago. 60 children receive after-school care and tutoring that helps them succeed academically. These programs exist because Principal Washington and her staff identified needs and created solutions. But what happens when you decide to move on to other projects? Asked Channel 7's education reporter. Do these programs disappear? That's exactly why we're working with the school district to institutionalize and expand these programs, Camille interjected. The goal was never to create dependency on private funding, but to demonstrate effective models that could be sustained through public-private partnerships. And the children? Asked another reporter. How do they feel about this controversy? Richard and Camille exchanged glances. They had deliberately kept the children away from media attention, but the question deserved an honest answer. The children know that adults who care about them have worked together to make sure they have what they need to learn and grow, Camille replied. They know their school is a place where they're valued and supported. That's what matters to them, and that's what should matter to all of us. After the press conference, Richard and Camille retreated to her office to assess the situation and plan their next steps. How are you feeling about all this? Camille asked, settling into her chair with obvious fatigue. Angry, Richard admitted. Not at Harrison or the criticism, but at the fact that we're spending time and energy defending programs that help children instead of using that time and energy to help more children. Welcome to education politics, Camille said with a rueful smile. Every good thing we try to do gets complicated by people who have different definitions of what good means. Do you think we should pull back? Avoid the controversy and focus on maintaining what we have. Camille looked at him with surprise. Richard Bennett, do you remember what you told me the day we met? That no child should sit in a cafeteria with an empty lunchbox. I remember. How many children are still sitting in cafeterias with empty lunchboxes in schools that don't have our programs? The question hit him like a physical blow. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Then we don't pull back. We move forward. We fight for the expansion, we prove that these programs work, and we ignore people who are more invested in being right than in helping children succeed. Richard looked at this remarkable woman who refused to be intimidated by controversy or discouraged by criticism, who saw challenges as problems to solve rather than reasons to retreat. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? He asked. Show me by staying committed to this fight, she replied. Show me by refusing to let politics and procedures matter more than children's well-being. Deal? Richard said, reaching for her hand. But I have one condition. What's that? We face whatever comes next together. No matter how complicated it gets, we make decisions together and support each other through whatever consequences follow. Camille squeezed his hand tightly. Together. Always. Outside her office window, they could see children playing during afternoon recess, their laughter and energy completely unaffected by adult controversies and political complications. Those children were the reason for everything they were fighting for. And they were worth whatever challenges lay ahead. The Lincoln Elementary Annual Talent Show had become one of Richard's favorite events since becoming part of the school community. The gymnasium was packed with proud families, decorated with artwork from the restored art program, and filled with nervous energy as children prepared to showcase their talents for an audience of people who loved them unconditionally. Richard sat in the front row beside Monica Thompson, both of them waiting anxiously for Stella's performance. Over the past 8 months, Stella had blossomed from a quiet girl with an empty lunchbox into a confident child who had discovered a genuine passion for music through the program they had established. I can't believe how much she's changed, Monica whispered to Richard as they watched the third-grade class perform a group dance routine. A year ago she was too shy to speak up in class. Tonight she's performing a solo piece she composed herself. She was always remarkable, Richard replied, his eyes scanning the audience until he found Camille near the side of the stage, coordinating with student performers. She just needed the opportunity to discover what was possible. Monica followed his gaze and smiled knowingly. Speaking of remarkable people discovering what's possible. Richard felt his cheeks warm slightly. His relationship with Camille had become one of the most talked about aspects of their community programs, with everyone from students to parents offering opinions and advice about their obvious happiness together. Actually, Richard said quietly, patting his jacket pocket to make sure the small velvet box was still secure. "I'm hoping tonight will be memorable for several reasons." Monica's eyes widened with excitement. "Richard Bennett, are you planning what I think you're planning?" Before he could respond, the lights dimmed and Principal Washington took the microphone to introduce the next performer. "Our next artist is someone very special to our Lincoln Elementary family," Camille announced, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium. "Stella Thompson will be performing an original composition she calls The Kindness Song." Richard's chest tightened with pride and emotion as Stella walked confidently onto the stage. She wore a bright red dress that Monica had saved for months to buy, and her hair was adorned with small ribbons that caught the stage lights. At 9 years old, she carried herself with poise that would have impressed professional performers twice her age. She settled at the piano bench, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the audience with a smile that lit up the entire gymnasium. "I wrote this song about how kindness can change everything," Stella announced clearly. "It's dedicated to Mr. Richard and Miss Washington, who showed me that when people care about each other, amazing things can happen." The simple piano melody that followed was hauntingly beautiful, played with the skill of a child who had discovered her gift and nurtured it with passionate dedication. But it was Stella's voice that took Richard's breath away. There was a little girl with nothing in her box, just a note that said, "I love you," when her world felt full of rocks. Then someone saw her sitting there and asked, "What can I do?" That's when kindness started growing and her world became brand new. Richard felt tears streaming down his face as Stella continued singing about empty lunchboxes becoming full, lonely children finding friends, and communities growing stronger when people choose love over indifference. Kindness is a magic thing that grows with every share. It starts with just one person who decides to really care. And when you give your kindness out, it comes right back to you. That's how one empty lunchbox helped make dreams and love come true. The gymnasium erupted in thunderous applause as Stella finished her performance. She stood beside the piano, beaming with pride and confidence, transformed from the quiet child Richard had met 8 months earlier into this radiant young performer who had just brought an entire community to tears with her talent and message. As the applause died down and Stella started to leave the stage, Richard suddenly stood up. "Wait," he called out, his voice carrying through the microphone system. "Stella, could you stay on stage for just one more minute?" Confused but game for anything, Stella returned to the microphone while Richard walked toward the stage. The audience watched with curiosity as he climbed the steps and approached the young girl who had started it all. "Stella, your song was beautiful and perfect, and it reminded me of something very important," Richard said, taking the microphone. "It reminded me that kindness really does grow when we share it, and that amazing things happen when people decide to care about each other." He looked out at the audience filled with families whose lives had been touched by the programs they had built together, then turned to find Camille standing in the wings with a confused but encouraging expression. 8 months ago, I came to this school for a photo opportunity that I thought would last 30 minutes, Richard continued. Instead, I met a little girl with an empty lunchbox and she changed my life completely. But more importantly, I met the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Understanding dawned in Camille's eyes as Richard gestured for her to join him on stage. She shook her head slightly, but the encouraging applause from the audience left her no choice but to walk out under the bright lights. "Principal Washington," Richard said as she approached, his voice slightly shaky with nerves, "you've taught me what real leadership looks like. You've shown me that success means making a difference in people's lives, not accumulating wealth or power. You've helped me become a better man than I ever imagined I could be." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the velvet box, dropping to one knee right there on the Lincoln Elementary talent show stage while Stella watched with obvious delight and the entire community held its breath. "Camille Washington, you are the love of my life, my partner in everything that matters and the person I want to spend the rest of my life serving this community with," Richard said, opening the box to reveal a stunning but elegant engagement ring. "Will you marry me?" The gymnasium fell completely silent for one perfect moment before Camille's joyful yes was nearly drowned out by the explosive cheers and applause from everyone present. As Richard slipped the ring onto Camille's finger and stood to kiss his fiancée, Stella grabbed the microphone one more time. "I told you they were going to get married," she announced to the audience with the supreme satisfaction of a child whose predictions had come true. Anybody could see they were perfect for each other. The laughter and celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with families congratulating the couple, children asking to see the ring, and everyone agreeing that this was the most memorable talent show in Lincoln Elementary history. Later that night, as Richard and Camille sat alone in her office surrounded by congratulation flowers and leftover celebration cake, they held hands and marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "A year ago, did you ever imagine your life would look like this?" Camille asked, admiring her engagement ring in the soft office lighting. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined any of this," Richard replied honestly. "The programs, the community, falling in love with an incredible woman who challenges me to be better every single day. And all because you paid attention to one little girl's empty lunchbox." "No," Richard corrected gently, "all because you created a school where that little girl knew she was valued and cared for, even when she didn't have lunch. I just provided resources. You provided the vision, the expertise, and the heart that made everything possible." Camille leaned over to kiss her fiancé, overwhelmed by gratitude for the unexpected path that had led them both to this perfect moment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more programs to develop, more children to serve, and wedding plans to make. But tonight, they simply sat together in the quiet school that had become their shared ministry, surrounded by evidence of what was possible when people chose love over indifference and action over apathy. Outside in the hallway, a small memorial display honored the journey they had taken together. Photos of the first lunch program, artwork from the restored art classes, and in the center, a frame containing Stella's original note from her mother and a picture of Stella performing at tonight's talent show. From empty lunchbox to full community. From loneliness to love. From success measured in dollars to success measured in transformed lives. It had been quite a year. The morning of Richard and Camille's wedding dawned bright and clear, with the kind of perfect spring weather that seemed designed for new beginnings. Instead of a traditional church ceremony, they had chosen to hold their celebration in the Lincoln Elementary Gymnasium, decorated for the occasion with flowers from the community garden and artwork created by students in the restored art program. "I still can't believe you're getting married at school," Jennifer said as she helped Richard adjust his burgundy tie in the principal's office, which had been converted into a makeshift groom's preparation room. "When I started working for you 5 years ago, I never would have predicted this." "5 years ago, I never would have predicted any of this," Richard admitted, looking at himself in the mirror and seeing a man he barely recognized. Gone was the cold, calculating businessman who had measured success solely in profit margins. In his place stood someone who had learned that the most important investments couldn't be tracked on spreadsheets. "Mr. Richard, you look very handsome," announced Stella as she burst through the door wearing a bright blue flower girl dress that matched her enormous smile. "Miss Washington looks beautiful too. She's in the art room getting ready with my mama and all the other ladies." "Thank you, Miss Stella. Are you ready for your big job today?" "I've been practicing walking slowly and not dropping the flowers for 2 weeks," she replied with the seriousness of someone who understood the weight of her responsibilities. "And I have my song ready too." Over the past months, Stella had become the unofficial mascot of Richard and Camille's love story, appointed by community consensus to perform at their wedding ceremony. Her musical talents had continued to develop under the guidance of Mr. Jackson, and she had composed a special piece for the occasion. "Places everyone," called out Mrs. Patterson, who had enthusiastically agreed to serve as wedding coordinator. "We're ready to begin." Richard walked into the gymnasium to find nearly 300 people seated in rows of folding chairs, representing the extended Lincoln Elementary family that had grown far beyond the original school community. Parents, teachers, students, local business owners who had joined their programs, and even some of the high school tutors who had started as elementary students themselves. At the front of the gymnasium, an arch of flowers and ribbons had been created by the art students, with Stella's piano positioned nearby for her performance. Richard took his place beside Reverend Martinez from the local community center, who had agreed to officiate the ceremony. The music began, and Richard watched as the wedding party made their way down the improvised aisle. Jennifer served as Camille's maid of honor, wearing a dress in the same shade of blue as Stella's. Monica Thompson walked as Richard's honorary best woman, a role she had accepted with tears of gratitude when he asked her to stand with him. Then Stella appeared at the back of the gymnasium, carrying a basket of flower petals and walking with careful, measured steps while beaming at the crowd of people who had watched her grow from a shy child with an empty lunchbox into this confident young performer. Finally, the music changed and Richard's breath caught in his throat as Camille appeared at the back of the gymnasium. She wore a simple but elegant ivory dress that complemented her natural beauty, and her smile was so radiant that Richard felt his heart skip several beats. As she walked down the aisle, Richard noticed the faces of community members who had become family. Mrs. Rodriguez dabbing her eyes with tissues, Mr. Jackson recording everything on his phone, teenagers who had been helped by their programs now serving as ushers and ceremony assistants. When Camille reached the front of the gymnasium and took Richard's hands, Reverend Martinez smiled at the assembled community. "We are gathered today not just to celebrate the marriage of Richard and Camille, but to witness the continuation of a love story that began with service and has grown into something that touches all of our lives," he began. "This community has watched these two remarkable people discover that the greatest success comes from caring for others, and today we celebrate their commitment to building a future together." The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful, with vows that Richard and Camille had written themselves, focusing on their shared commitment to serving their community and supporting each other in the work that had brought them together. "Richard," Camille said, holding his hands and looking directly into his eyes, "you taught me that kindness and resources can combine to create miracles. You've shown me what partnership looks like when it's built on respect, shared values, and genuine love. I promise to spend our life together continuing the work we've started, supporting the children and families who have become our extended family, and loving you with all my heart." "Camille," Richard replied, his voice thick with emotion, "you transformed my understanding of what it means to live a meaningful life. You showed me that true wealth comes from relationships, from service, from making a difference in the world around us. I promise to spend our marriage following your example of compassionate leadership, supporting your vision for our community, and loving you more deeply each day." After they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, Stella took her place at the piano for the musical interlude she had prepared. The song she had composed for their wedding was called "Two Hearts, One Dream," and it told the story of how love grows when people work together to help others. The reception took place in the school cafeteria, transformed with decorations and filled with food prepared by community members who had insisted on contributing to the celebration. Instead of a traditional wedding cake, they served cupcakes made by the students in the after-school baking program, each one decorated with messages of love and congratulations. "Speech! Speech!" called out several voices as Richard and Camille took their places at the head table. Richard stood, taking Camille's hand as he addressed the crowd of people who had become their chosen family. "A little over a year ago, I came to this school thinking I was doing a favor for the community," he began. "I had no idea that the community was about to do the greatest favor of my life by showing me what really matters." He looked down at Camille, then out at the faces surrounding them. Children whose lives had been transformed by the programs they had built together, parents whose opportunities had expanded through community partnerships, teachers and staff who had embraced their vision for comprehensive student support. Today, Camille and I aren't just promising to love each other. We're promising to continue the work we've started together, to keep building programs that serve children and families, and to remember always that our greatest success will be measured by the lives we touch rather than the wealth we accumulate. The applause was thunderous, but Richard held up his hand for one more moment. "We have one announcement to make. Today we're officially establishing the Stella Foundation for Childhood Development, named for the little girl whose empty lunchbox started this entire journey. The foundation will work to expand our programs to schools throughout the region, ensuring that every child has access to nutrition, education support, and comprehensive care." As the celebration continued around them, Richard and Camille slipped away for a quiet moment alone in the school garden that had become one of their favorite places to talk and plan. "Mrs. Bennett," Richard said, trying out his wife's new name, "how does it feel to be married to a reformed billionaire?" "It feels like the beginning of the most amazing adventure," Camille replied, kissing her husband under the string lights that had been hung throughout the garden for the occasion. Looking back toward the gymnasium where their community was celebrating, they could hear laughter, music, and the sounds of children playing even at this late hour. It was the sound of a community that had learned to care for each other, to celebrate together, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. It was the sound of love lived out loud. And it was just the beginning of everything they would build together. 1 year after their wedding, Richard and Camille Bennett stood in the same gymnasium where they had been married, but this time they were attending Stella Thompson's 5th grade graduation ceremony. Richard's hand rested protectively on Camille's growing belly, where their first child was due to arrive in just 2 months, while they watched the young girl who had started their entire journey prepare to receive her elementary school diploma. "Can you believe how much has changed?" Camille whispered as they took their seats in the front row reserved for honored guests. Richard looked around the gymnasium, which had been updated with new sound equipment, improved lighting, and fresh paint, all funded through the Stella Foundation that had grown far beyond their original vision. The walls were covered with photos documenting the programs that had expanded from Lincoln Elementary to 53 schools across 4 districts. "Sometimes I feel like we're living in a dream," Richard replied, squeezing his wife's hand gently. A year and a half ago, I was a completely different person living a completely different life. On the stage, Principal Washington Bennett, she had kept her professional name to maintain continuity for the school community, was introducing the graduation speaker, Monica Thompson, who now served as the regional coordinator for the Stella Foundation's Family Services programs. Our speaker today knows personally how education, opportunity, and community support can transform lives, Camille announced to the audience. Monica Thompson has worked tirelessly to ensure that other families have access to the resources and programs that helped her daughter thrive. Monica took the podium wearing a professional navy dress and the confident posture of someone who had found her calling. She looked out at the graduating students and their families with the wisdom of someone who had lived both sides of their story. 2 years ago, I was working 3 jobs and still couldn't afford to put food in my daughter's lunchbox, Monica began, her voice clear and strong. I wrote notes apologizing for empty lunches and hoping tomorrow would be different. I was a mother doing everything I could, but it wasn't enough. She gestured toward Richard and Camille in the audience. Then 2 people decided that my daughter's empty lunchbox was unacceptable. Not because they had to help, but because they chose to see her as worthy of dignity, nutrition, and opportunity. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. What happened next changed not just my family's life, but the lives of hundreds of families in our community. Programs were created, jobs were developed, children received tutoring and arts education, and parents found pathways to better opportunities. Monica's voice grew stronger as she continued. But the most important thing that happened wasn't about money or programs. It was about adults deciding that children matter, that families deserve support, that communities grow stronger when people choose to care about each other. She looked directly at the graduating students. You are graduating from elementary school with advantages that many children don't have. You've had access to music and art programs, tutoring and mentorship, nutritious meals and after-school care. You've seen what's possible when adults work together to create opportunities for children to succeed. Now you have a choice. You can take these advantages and use them only for yourselves, or you can remember that success means lifting others up as you climb. You can be the kind of people who see empty lunchboxes and choose to fill them, who see problems and choose to solve them, who see people in need and choose to help. The graduation ceremony continued with individual student recognitions, but when Stella's name was called, she walked across the stage with particular pride. Over the past 2 years, she had become an accomplished pianist, a confident public speaker, and a natural leader among her peers. The scholarship she had earned to attend the prestigious middle school arts program was just the beginning of possibilities that stretched as far as her dreams could take her. After receiving her diploma, Stella approached the microphone for the student response speech she had been selected to deliver. 2 years ago, I was embarrassed about my empty lunchbox, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the gymnasium's improved sound system. I thought it meant my family was failing, that I wasn't worth caring about, that I should hide my problems and pretend everything was okay. She looked out at her graduating classmates, many of whom had benefited from the various programs that had grown from that first moment of compassion. Then I learned something important. I learned that problems aren't something to be ashamed of. Problems are opportunities for communities to come together and show what they're really made of. My empty lunchbox wasn't a failure, it was a chance for people to show kindness. Stella's confidence and wisdom drew murmurs of appreciation from the adult audience. We're graduating from Lincoln Elementary with more than just good grades and certificates. We're graduating with proof that people care about us, that adults will work hard to give us what we need to succeed, and that communities can create amazing things when they decide to put children first. She paused, looking directly at Richard and Camille. Mr. Richard and Principal Bennett, thank you for teaching us that kindness is the most powerful force in the world. Thank you for showing us that when people choose love over indifference, empty things get filled, broken things get fixed, and impossible things become possible. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Stella held up her hand for one final thought. To my classmates, we're the luckiest kids in the world because we've been loved well. Now it's our turn to love others well. Let's graduate from this school and spend the rest of our lives making sure no child ever has to sit alone with an empty lunchbox. After the ceremony, Richard and Camille found themselves surrounded by families wanting to express gratitude for the programs that had touched their lives. Parents shared stories of job training that led to career advancement. Children talked about discovering talents in art and music classes. Teenagers described how tutoring programs had helped them excel academically. Mrs. Bennett, I wanted you to know that the financial literacy workshop helped my family buy our first house, said Mrs. Garcia, holding hands with her husband and 3 children. We never thought home ownership was possible until we learned about budgeting and credit management through your family services program. The after-school mentoring saved my son's life," added Mr. Johnson, whose teenage son had been struggling academically before connecting with one of the high school tutors. He went from failing grades to honor roll because someone believed in him and gave him the support he needed. Story after story reinforced what Richard and Camille had learned over the past 2 years. Sustainable change happened when communities invested in comprehensive support for children and families, not just quick fixes or temporary assistance. As the evening wound down and families headed home, Richard, Camille, Stella, and Monica found themselves alone in the gymnasium, surrounded by the decorations and memories of the graduation celebration. "I have something for you," Stella announced, pulling a small wrapped package from her graduation dress pocket. "It's a gift for both of you but especially for your baby." Inside the package was a small photo frame containing the original note Monica had written in Stella's empty lunchbox 2 years earlier, alongside a picture of Stella performing at Richard and Camille's wedding. "I wanted you to remember where it all started," Stella explained seriously. "And I wanted your baby to know the story of how empty lunchboxes can lead to full hearts and changed lives." Richard felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at the simple note that had changed everything. "My sweet Stella, I'm so sorry there's no food today. I promise I'll try again tomorrow. You are my sunshine and I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Love, Mama." "This is perfect," Camille said, her voice thick with emotion. "We'll put it in the baby's room so they grow up knowing that love and kindness can transform the world." As they walked out of Lincoln Elementary together, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. A billionaire who had measured success in stock prices had become a man whose greatest wealth was counted in transformed lives. A principal who had struggled to serve her students with limited resources had become the leader of a foundation touching thousands of children across multiple districts. And a little girl with an empty lunchbox had become a confident young woman ready to change the world with the same kindness that had first changed her life. Looking up at the clear night sky filled with stars, Richard remembered Stella's song from the talent show. "Kindness is a magic thing that grows with every share. It starts with just one person who decides to really care." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more children to serve, more communities to support, and the arrival of their own child who would grow up understanding that true success meant lifting others up. But tonight, walking hand in hand with his wife toward their car while Stella skipped ahead singing softly to herself, Richard Bennett was simply grateful for the empty lunchbox that had led him home to the life he was meant to live. A life measured not in billions but in kindness. A life built not on profit but on love. A life that proved, beyond any doubt, that the smallest acts of compassion could create the most extraordinary transformations. The end.